commitment. It's a lot of dedication. There's going to be a lot of success. There's going to be a lot of failures. So you got to be prepared to deal with all the failures that will come, and all the times you'll be faced with just to kind of walk away from the exams and maybe pursue something else in something related, like finance related. So for me, it's been quite a long journey. I wrote my first exam back in when I was in second year of university. So even before then, I had no idea what actuarial science was in high school. I applied to multiple programs. So from engineering to life sciences to business programs. But this one program, actually my high school teacher, who was also a graduate from the university that I went to, he really recommended that I go there for not even actuarial science, but it was a more general math and business double degree program. So I ended up applying there. I got in and I started. And first year, pretty much everyone takes common core courses like calculus, algebra, computer science, etc. So I had no clue what actuarial science was even at that point. But it was only until second year where I took my first mathematical interest theory course, and really I started to attend more seminars similar to how you guys are doing right now. Went to multiple conferences, job fairs, and really try to understand what the industry is all about. So that's where I started in terms of being from a student. Actually, the first time I wrote an exam, I have a funny story for you guys. So I took the first two exams are called P and FM. I believe they're still called P and FM.
Yep.
So I took the necessary courses that give me the background for those exams, and I had a few of my friends taking them, and they passed it as well. And I said, "Hey, I'm a pretty good student. I'm getting good grades. I'm pretty studious. So let me just take both of them at the same time." And so I scheduled both exams. I think it was a week and a half apart. Right after I passed my final exams for the courses in university. So I went into the exams. I wrote both the exams. And what actually happened was I failed both of them. So that was like the reality shock to me. So I said, hey, this isn't like a joke. You need to really spend some time on this, come up with a plan, and really attack them, because they're not just retrieval or do you understand these concepts. They're more like more on the application. Can you actually apply those concepts? Can you actually communicate those concepts? And a lot of the times it's there's other aspects too, just as you're writing the exam, like in terms of time management, which I'll talk about later. So that was something completely new for me. So as I was in my undergrad, from second year to my final year, I try to write exams as I took the necessary courses. So I was fortunate enough, by the time I graduated, I had 4 exams done.
Yeah, that's good.
4 exams done, yeah. And I'm not sure how much you guys know about the job market in Canada, but the job market is very competitive, especially for actuaries. But just south of us in the US, because of how big they are, the population, and also how mature the market is in terms of insurance and the job market, there's plenty of opportunities there. But it's just very unique in Canada that it's a niche market, I'd say, more so in Canada. So when I graduated, I was looking for full-time work in the actuarial space. And I would get interviews. I'd make it to the final round of interviews, but for some reason I wasn't getting selected. So I actually started off my career on the trading floor for a bank. It's called Bank of Montreal. It's one of the big 5 banks in Canada. And over there, I did more of the risk oversight, risk management of all the interest rate and credit derivative portfolios that they were trading. So even though it's not a typical actuarial position or designated job, it was very applicable in terms of like dealing with people, dealing with multiple priorities, projects, and also the work was very similar, even though it was more on the asset side of things. So at BMO, as you can probably imagine, working on the trading floor, you don't get much time to yourself. So after work, I'd be exhausted. But I managed to squeeze in my last exam for the ASA. So at that point, at that time, it was only 5 exams to get your ASA and all the necessary modules. So I tried to get as much of that done while I was at BMO, Bank of Montreal, and successfully I was able to get it done. I was there for 3 years, but at the same time, I really wanted to get more experience on the insurance side. And so that's where I kind of landed with my current company. It's Manulife. We operate as Manulife in the world. In the US, we operate as John Hancock, but in the rest of the world, we operate as Manulife. So we operate in Canada, US, and Asia. We have very little business in Europe and the Middle East, but we're one of the biggest insurers, multinational insurers, and we rank among the top, whether it's in Canada, US, or Asia. So when I actually got to Manulife, they had a very generous study program, and I'm not sure how the programs work with employers in Saudi, but it was very generous in that if you're writing an FSA exam, you would get about 6 to 8 days to study, so 6 to 8 days off. Reimburse their notes or books, and also once you do pass the exam, you do get a raise. And now they changed it, but it's more performance and merit based in terms of the promotions as well. But typically, when you reach your FSA, shortly right after, if you're a good performer as well, you get promoted to a manager level.
Oh.
And within Manulife, I've seen several different areas, from asset liability management to risk management. And my current role right now is in our valuation area for our use for half the reserves that the company holds. So I've been there for about 3 years now as well in that role, and just about a year ago I was promoted to the director role. So now I'm leading on more of different projects, and one of the main projects I'm working on is IFRS 17 right now, which is a big regime change. But as you can tell, like, the journey was a long one. You have to balance both personal life, your career, other things that might come up in life, surprises, good things, bad things. So it's a long journey and it's a long commitment, but definitely worth the dedication, and the payoff, I would say, is very good as well.
It sure is. And how did you end up in the exam committee?
Yeah, so as part of, I've always been interested in learning more behind the scenes, what's happening. So that's what kind of intrigued me at first. But also, when you become a fellow, there's multiple opportunities to volunteer. So a lot of the people on the exam committee, whether it's writing the exams or grading the exams, a lot of them are just volunteers. Actually, most of them, 95% of them, are just volunteers. So I got involved for the track that I wrote. So I've done both writing exams and both grading exams. And I also volunteer in our Canadian Institute of Actuaries. So we're affiliated with the Society of Actuaries, but the Canadian Institute is more Canadian based. And even there, I've been part of committees like the Investment Practice Committee so we would publish different research papers or different surveys for the industry.
Oh, I see. That's great. While we're on the topic of writing exams, what are some common challenges you're facing when writing and grading exams?
I guess you're saying from a question writing perspective? Yeah. So question writing perspective is, I would say there's a very long process, and it's a very long vetting process. For example, I can come up with so for every exam, there's actually a pretty big committee that is assigned to writing questions for the exam. And once we do have a draft of the exam question, it goes through about at least 3 rounds of vetting in terms of review, whether the question is clear, whether it's fair, whether it's reasonable to answer within the time frame given. So it goes through multiple rounds of vetting. And actually, for example, if I was to write an exam question today, it may not show up until the next sitting or even 4 sittings down the road. But the main challenge there is, how do we test the candidate's ability to demonstrate that they understand the topic and can apply the topic. And we try to incorporate industry kind of best practices as well, but sticking mostly to the source that's being given in the syllabus.
I mean, I've seen you say that you've passed 4 exams before graduating university. What are some strategies students can use to pass exams?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, whenever you're writing an exam, you can kind of think of it as a 3.5 to 4 month preparation period. It's as if you're kind of preparing for, like, as boxers prepare for their fights. So there's a training camp for that. So you have to set aside 3.5, 4 months ahead of time and really be dedicated to that. And to be honest, a lot of the exams, they're just self-study, right? So I found, for me, what was easiest is if I understood the concepts first from my university courses, then I would go attempt the exams, rather than, I know a few friends that did it the other way around. They would attempt the exams first and then take the necessary university courses after. And it might be for like different reasons, just depending on availability of courses from the university. But what I try to do is, as you guys might know, every 6 months there's a sitting for exam. So every 6 months I would try to attempt an exam. And as you guys probably know, the passing rate is quite low. So you shouldn't feel so discouraged if you fail on the first attempt or the second attempt. But you have to make a conscious effort to kind of attempt every 6 months an exam. And every time you do fail, even if you do fail, it's a learning experience. And I'm sure it's going to help you down the road. So my first strategy was always to attempt an exam every 6 months.
I see. So you wouldn't miss any attempts. That's
Exactly. Yeah.
I see. Another question for you. For an average person, that's something a lot of people would have in mind, especially those that like to procrastinate. If we can put in maximum effort, how can someone finish? How fast can someone finish preparing for an exam? Would you say?
Yeah, I think one attempt per sitting is definitely the average. I know some people, they do 2 attempts, like 2 exams at the same sitting, but like, as I told you guys, when I did that the first time, I failed both, so it wasn't worth it. But I'd say a solid 3.5, 4 months, and follow your study schedule. Like, create a schedule, and you have to go through the source material by a certain date, review the review questions by a certain date, go over all your stuff again by a certain date. And everyone's kind of different, but I think the key is you have to come up with a plan and stick to it. And there's going to be times where you slip behind, so you have to kind of make up days that you can catch back up, or put some buffer into your schedule.
I see. And in your personal opinion, what were the, I would say, hardest 2 exams, and how much did it take you to pass them or finish them?
Yeah, so the preliminary exams are mostly calculations, and it's really more calculation based, whereas more the written exams for the FSA exams, they're more they're both calculation and how you answer the questions, in terms of how you communicate and how you show your understanding. So I would say the two most difficult for me, for some reason, the first one would be the life contingency exam. I think it's called short-term or long-term actuarial models now.
Yeah, LTAM.
Yeah, LTAM. And so that was difficult, maybe because it took me 3 attempts to pass that one.
Yeah.
That one was the one that took the most attempts for me to pass. And I would say the fellowship exam, just because the amount of material that's being covered is quite extensive. And it's a different test environment in that it's very long, it's written, and you really need to manage time as well. And I think I guess as we talk about successful study strategies as well, and how to write exams, we can get into that a bit more.
Okay. Let's move in a bit to the writing process. In general for exams, how much generally do you distribute between theory and actual actuarial applications in the industry in the exams?
Yeah, so there's a lot. We try to make it mostly so that it's more application, so that because the whole purpose is not to try to fail as many people, it's try to really get them to understand how to apply these concepts and how we it's a way to demonstrate for, the candidate how they can apply those concepts and really comprehend it. And so most of it, like for example, even if you'll find on the preliminary exams, they're not really, if you know the formula, you'll get the right answer. It's really how you need to apply it and what variables to put in, and what are some of the points that people would kind of fall for those mistakes as well. But a lot of the times it's more just trying to make it more applicable to the industry.
I see. How much do changes or developments in industry or new advancements in technology would affect exams and exam writing in general?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely, you'll see it a lot. It will be incorporated or tried to be incorporated immediately. So as I was saying, like one of the big regime changes is IFRS 17. And you'll see that make its way into various exams, probably more on the FSA levels. And I'll give you a kind of a good tip. So when you do see new materials being put into the exam syllabus, there is probably chances that it will be tested. It's not guaranteed, but you can imagine that it's a hot topic, and people, the exam committee wants to really get the implications to the industry out. And one way is to do it by testing it on the exam.
I see. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but I must say, like anything on the exam syllabus is fair game. So anything is possible. So like even though the exam syllabus might have 5 sections, it's not to assume 20% of the exam will be on the first part, etc., and second, and so on. A majority of the exam can be on like the 4th part, and it's just. But there is someone that chairs the exam writing committee that will make sure that the exam is there's not too much concentration on one topic, or that it's pretty much like harmonious.
I see. Let's move a bit to the grading process. Some of the ASA exams and exams that have been repeated a lot will show preliminary results. How are these evaluated?
Yeah, so basically the system is actually doing the evaluation. But again, it goes back to how we structure the exam. So every exam would be calibrated to have a certain level of difficulty. And based on, so every question kind of, when you're looking at multiple choice questions, every question kind of weighs the same. but then there'll be some sort of calibration in terms of how the entire exam scores in terms of difficulty. And based on that and how the students actually perform, that's how the pass mark is set, predetermined. So for example, this sitting, let's say we say 61% is a pass mark. Or sorry, I should say more like 75% is a pass mark. That's based on the set of questions that have already been allocated to that exam. And we feel a person needs 75 or more to pass that. However, you'll see that changes from sitting to sitting. And that's basically based on the collection of questions that are put together for that sitting.
I see.
And so it's very rare for the decision to be ruled the other way. I think it's like, if it happens, it's like one or two candidates out of like 5 sittings where the decision gets reversed.
Oh, it's that. I thought it was much slower, the chances of the decision being reversed.
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Okay.
I've heard of cases where there's 1 or 2 every 2 years or so.
Oh, okay. So for even for those with preliminary results, usually the grading process is around 8 weeks to get the actual grade. So what are the drivers that affect this kind of lengthy process?
Yeah, so essentially, I can speak more on the FSA level side, but for the preliminary one, what happens is they run a bunch of statistics in terms of the people that are passing and what questions were difficult or what questions were easy for candidates. And they, at that time, they're doing more calibration for the next sittings, but they're trying to understand if the exam was fair, or if they need to review kind of, I would say, like the relative curve in terms of like passing the exam. And so for preliminary exams, to be honest, I feel it can be shortened, that 8 weeks. However, there are, as I pointed out, right, there's a lot of volunteers that are working on this exam committee. So just getting people's time, just getting everything completed, all the statistics final within a certain time frame can become challenging.
I see. Before we go on, I just want to apologize to our participants that there are some network errors with Zoom, so that's why we have seen some disconnects. But hopefully we're all good right now. Moving on, will there be a point where all the exams become computer-based testing, and would that happen?
For preliminary, yes, but not for the FSA level. I think we're very far away from the FSA levels being anywhere near computer-based. Even if it does become computer-based, I know it's been asked quite a bit. We don't want to give any disadvantages to people that are slow typers, for example, or because we expect that like there shouldn't be any disadvantages or advantages when using the technology. So especially for the FSA level exams, because there's so much writing involved, you can see like some people might have disadvantages, advantages, and personally, I feel it would be a bit easier to manage from like a committee perspective, but at the same time, it's for those reasons.
I see. Just going back a bit about the exams. When you're writing exams, especially preliminary ones, is there an impact or an expectation for passing this exam's impact on a person's career? So let's say if they Do you intend that for someone who's passing like a preliminary exam, like an FM, STEM, do you design these exams based on your expectation of what impact they're going to have on passing on their career?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of tells like you've demonstrated expert knowledge in that area that the exam is testing. And um, I think from like an employer's perspective, they're more interested in the, like actuaries will never like focus in one area. So the exam kind of gives you a toolkit to to really familiarize yourself with like various areas. And so when you're passing like say STM, the exam, it's really, you've demonstrated, oh, you're understanding financial economics, some of the stochastic stuff. And so maybe there might be some favor when you do apply for a job that one student has already exposed and passed that exam because it's very applicable and relatable to the position that they're applying for.
I see. I see. Let's move on just to our last agenda, then we can move on to our Q&A. After the exams, some students, pass, some fail. What is your recommendation of someone who immediately after the exam, whether they have a preliminary answer or not? What is the suggested step?
Yeah, so I'd recommend for sure celebrate first because you put in 3.5-4 months of dedication into preparing for the exam. So regardless of the result, whether it's pass or fail, I think you should celebrate first. But then secondly, start preparing for the next exam. I know you have to wait 8 weeks to know what's going to happen, but during those 8 weeks, you can start or you can fill in those 8 weeks by taking modules, which might be the first step of taking the next exam, especially when you start moving on to the later exams, because even like the fundamental actuarial practice course, there's a lot of topics in there that when I look back at it from writing the exams, I kind of wish I would have taken those modules to kind of give me more context in terms of some of the topics that were being covered in the preliminary exams. So one of the things I did was I did all my exams first and then I did my modules. And that was just me trying to get my exams done as quickly as possible. But if I was to think back, you should try to balance both of them because they do give you enough context and background for the preliminary and the FSA exams. So I'd say within the 8 weeks, try to take some rest, but try to move on and really think about, okay, do you want to attack a module or do you want to start preparing for the next exam? Maybe it's a topic where you're very weak on it or very strong on it. So you kind of devise your plan accordingly.
I see. I just have, before we go to Q&A, I just have one question regarding the grading. The grading comes out as a score from 0 to 10. But we're told that it's 10 does not mean a full mark, or 0 does not mean you haven't answered any questions wrong. Is there can we get maybe some info on why that is? Or
yeah, so it goes back to how difficult we feel the exam has been calibrated. And so it's kind of goes back to percentiles and relative. So a person that scored 10 would have been in kind of like the top percentiles of that sitting. So you can kind of think of it as it's calibrated to that sitting in terms of 0 to 10. So if you have a strong number of candidates, we'll still try to, they will still try to achieve a bell-shaped type of passing, but it's just going to be kind of scaled and calibrated to that sitting specifically.
I see. So it's kind of like a ranking more than an actual grade of what you...
Exactly. Yep. but it is 6 or more is a pass. So it is kind of a ranking, but at the same time calibrated so that 6 or more is a pass. And that's why they run all those statistics at the end of the exam, just to make sure that their previous assumptions about how difficult the exam was still, there isn't any major issues. There'll be some variations, but that's kind of expected.
I see. Okay, then we can move on to the attendees' Q&A questions. Please, if you have any questions, do ask them in the chat. And let's go on to the first one. Ms. Jane asks, what is the best sources for preparing for an exam?
So you definitely want to read the syllabus, and all the what I like to do is actually read the source materials they recommend, because as an exam committee question writer, I don't go to any of the study notes to write my exam, like my exam questions. I actually have to go back to the source, read the source, and formulate a question from the source. So definitely don't skip the source materials that are written on the syllabus. And also, if there's any SOA study notes, make sure you read them as well. So that's like the first step. And then second step, what I found useful was I'd use one of those supplemental study guides, so PAC or ASM. And those were more for kind of higher level summarized points in terms of what the various readings are about. But if you don't go and read the source, you won't know some of the details that might be tested. So for example, the PAC study manual will cover, because it's a more condensed notes, right? So it might cover 70% of the material. But that 30% that's left off, it's really for you to understand as well. And that might be something that's tested.
Okay. Just going on a tangent from Jane's question, we've seen in recent times the emergence of new study tools, like I'm sure you've heard of Infinite Actuary, Coaching Actuaries. I'm sure these have made people more equipped to pass exams, given that they have a lot of practice exams. Do these affect the exam writing process or the grading process?
Sorry, does it affect the exam?
So given that they make people more equipped for passing exams, did that perhaps suggest making exams more difficult, or adjusting the grading somehow? Or
I see. I would say it comes down to like all the sources out there. It's helping with practice, right? So the more practice people have, the more chances to pass. But I don't think we've made any consideration in terms of, oh, there's so many sources out there and we expect all the students to at least use one of them. So we always work under the assumption that they only have the recommended source materials that we've published. And there's also past exam questions that the SOA has. So we're always working under that assumption. Obviously, if you're using like an external source, that's giving you more practice, and we don't necessarily adjust for that in terms of how we're setting the pass mark. It's really based on how we feel the difficulty of the question and the overall exam is.
I see. We do have another question from Mr. Abdulkareem. Some exams have, those that are not written, have a period of where you can select which exam you can, a day you can take your exam in. So let's say you're registering for an STEM, you can select a period to take your exam from a period of, let's say, 20th of May till 25th of May. The difficulty in each exam day, is there a difference? Is there a
No, it shouldn't, because the pool of questions should be randomly selected, and
Mhm.
um, the collection of questions put together on average should be the same difficulty.
I see, I see. Um, one question asks is, we have a lot of FSA paths, and some people are interested in perhaps taking more than one FSA path. Is there a way that people can merge, or is there is there something that the SOA will offer something like that to merge two paths?
Um, I don't think so. Unfortunately, not. I
Mm.
I think given the various tracks, once you, I know like the risk management exam, for example, it crosses multiple paths, but
Mhm.
once you write one exam in that, like the next, the second FSA exam in that track, you're pretty much, it makes more sense to finish that track because you've already invested in going down that track. Um, but I've seen people where they, for whatever reason, maybe they can't pass the final FSA exam, or they're just more interested in another exam track. They do switch over and go back to the second FSA exam and then write the third FSA exam as well. But I don't think there's any considerations or any discussions around merging tracks.
I see.
It's it's also because like the final, the exams kind of build on each other in terms of prerequisites and what we assume that the candidate knows.
I see. I see. I have a question that asks, um, regardless of there are some exemptions that can be made from one society to another, like the IFOA in the UK and the SOA. So, is there some sort of collaboration that happens with both for these exams, or and
Yeah, so
mhm.
yeah, I feel it's a bit more independent until you get to the fellowship level. Um, so for example, I had a boss before that qualified through the IFOA, but there's no way to actually convert it to an FSA.
Mhm.
But the thing to note there is, once you're a fellow of one of the major societies like Society of Actuaries or Canadian Institute or the UK one, they're pretty well recognized globally.
I see, I see.
But there isn't anything that says if I have my FSA, I can get my fellowship from the IFOA.
I see, I see. What are some? I know you've worked also. You said with the CAS. What are some advantages to take exams from like the SOA other than other actuarial societies?
Yeah, I think I'll be biased because I've lived most of my life in North America, but um, obviously the SOA is more because of the US market, it's been more mature. The US insurance market has been around for many, many years, and it's very mature in terms of competitiveness, the number of companies, the number of members, the number of kind of the various initiatives that the society does. So I feel like the Society of Actuaries is one of the biggest bodies, but that doesn't mean other institutions. Um, it really depends on where you think you may want to land a job or where you think gives you the most opportunities. But like I was saying, like once you do get the fellowship, it's pretty much globally recognized.
Okay. We have a question from Ahmed that asks, is it possible to study the first exams in a period of 6 weeks? Would you would you suggest?
I mean, I think for the preliminary exams, if you've had some exposure to the concepts and the topics, 6 weeks is definitely um, doable. But again, the SOA exams are kind of a different type of exam, so that you'll be faced with new things that you probably did not think of, especially around time management. But I think it's doable. If you're, I wouldn't discourage you. I think it's doable, and I think it'll, within those 6 weeks, you have to put in like 100% commitment.
I see, I see. And I think we don't have any more questions left. Oh, we do from one Mr. Tariq. Is it possible to conduct SOA exams online under the current circumstances? I think he's asking so because since some of the SOA exams have been unfortunately during the COVID crisis, they've been delayed. So do you or postponed? Do you know any? Do you have any information regarding that? Or?
Yeah, I don't think they've there's no considerations to administer them online through a heavily supervised environment, and
Yeah.
for that reason, they postponed the exams. Even the grading and the writing, they postponed that time frame as well.
Oh. Oh, I see. I see. We have a question from Lejane again. She asks if I'm studying masters in actuarial science in the UK, should I take the exams from the IFOA or should I take it from the SOA?
I would personally say IFOA because you're already there. It's also maybe there's some affiliation of the master's program to that society as well, and there might be some certain things that you may get credit for depending on the structure of the master's program. Like, for example, I know like the university I went to University of Waterloo, which is in Canada. The master's program there does have some exemptions for the preliminary exams. So you definitely want to check that out, which one you feel is best for you. The reason why I say it sometimes comes down to personal as well, because if you think UK is where you're happy to study and where you think you can potentially work, then definitely going with the IFOA is, in the shorter term, it's going to give you more opportunities, and then longer term, it's easily recognizable globally.
I see. That's great, and we'd like to thank you for your time, Mr. Abdulkareem. We're very happy that you joined us, and before we go, we just have one last question.
Yep, no worries.
Some exams I passed contain materials that never used in my job, especially STEM. So I may lose my ability of remembering the needed materials if I move to a different place. So what do you recommend for this? I'm guessing he's asking that in his profession he's not using most of his of the skills learned in some of these exams.
Yeah, so, you'll see that. Yeah, you'll see that happen. And like I said, it's more like a toolkit that you have now, and you can, because you've really understood the concept, it would be easier for you to refresh from it if needed. And especially as an actuary, you might be exposed to different areas, or different areas might be interacting in terms of the work that you're doing. So definitely it's more of a toolkit rather than a foregone kind of like cost that you think might not come up. But I agree, like there's certain things that I learned from my exams that I haven't used so far, but I feel like most of the time it's more about problem solving and communicating, and a lot of the exams they do that despite the topics being different.
I see. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and that's it. Thank you, Sadika.
Yeah, thank you guys. Hopefully you guys found this useful, and again, very happy, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.